Is there anybody that has a question or would like to say something?
Hi. My question is, I guess, generally for the panel, not for anyone in particular. I suppose it's difficult today to separate energy from sustainability. And I'm just wondering, through your work, just looking through the show, a lot of the pieces seem to claim to set an example or to make us think about the way we use energy, but not many of them seem to offer solutions. I'm wondering whether you see this as the responsibility of design, or if that's something that we leave to science, for instance.
Is there somebody who...
Is this on? Yeah.
Yeah, it's on.
I guess they're looking at me to answer this. Well, I think personally, I think that, or what I was attempting to say in the presentation was that I don't think that there's any one particular solution. I think it's a lot of different things, and I do think that finding new sustainable solutions, looking at new renewable energy sources, is one way to do it. But personally, I think it's also to do with the fact that we overconsume, that's a fact. And we have to sort of find a way to change our behaviors. And so I think, particularly in relation to myself or Fiona's work, I think that part of that is to challenge these assumptions and to try and make you think slightly differently, to try and alter the behavior in relation to energy consumption or something else. But of course, I think that we need to, there is a responsibility of designers to also try to create more sustainable solutions. Actually, personally, this is something I'm already doing, like in some subsequent projects which actually aren't part of the exhibition. I'm very keen to take that forward and to try and find alternative ways. So it's not just always about making statements, but it's about trying to create real life solutions. And so actually with one project I did is it's called Trap Light, and it's about using photoluminescent pigments as a way to recycle light from the light bulb in order to create a kind of ambient lighting solution. So the thinking is still the same, but I think it's important to try and attack the problem from various different angles.
How can I put this? I don't think it's to say that it should be about design to give examples, solutions. I think it's kind of not the right way to look at it. In some ways, I think it's a kind of the process of commercialization of technology and the marketing processes. All of these systems and processes are actually, the will has to be there. It comes down to a kind of economic issue in many ways. It's going to be, how expensive it is to do it. And so the whole sort of economics obviously plays a huge, how much money do people make from creating energy sources. So, I just think it's, we think we're looking at it as though all common designers have to make more solutions, but in fact I don't think it's not about that. It's a political issue about how we consume. It's a much bigger sort of issue than just creating solutions. So I didn't articulate that very well, but
so that's the role of a designer that's the role that you give to a designer to do that?
I don't even think it's about design. I think in some ways it's a tiny little. I actually think that from my own point of view, design thinking speculatively is a tiny little starting point. But I think economists should start thinking speculatively. I think that manufacturers should start thinking speculatively. There should be a lot more sort of rethinking through, speculative ideas, thinking about what the possibilities can be, investing time in thinking rather than always wanting a quick return back on any investment as soon as possible and as quickly as possible. If we're not going to invest in thinking about many different solutions, then I don't think there's much hope for anybody really.
And it's something that you do, obviously, with your work.
Well, as a tiny designer in a tiny little part of a huge, massive system, we try and do one small that can inspire people to do that. And I think that if that inspiration can help other kind of professions and things to start to speculate and inspire, it's a virus. in that, you know, to think speculatively, and that's how I see that design could help to facilitate other decision-making people to create speculation and think of alternatives. So that's how I think it.
And it gives a special role to a designer or an artist in that process.
I think that they could start getting that ball rolling to see, very much actually, to see alternative processes. There isn't just one way in which we're going to solve the way. The more diversity of thinking we can have, the more chance we've got, to be honest.
Yeah. Because Theo, also in your work, you didn't talk about the starting point or the idea that triggered you to start making the first beast, because that was actually quite an applied problem, or can you say an applied problem?
Yes, well, of course it was a utopical thought that I wanted to strand beast to build dunes to save us for the rise of the sea level in the coming century. That was the idea first, but then I became more interested in evolution and the sources, the roots of life. But as you say, that we don't, well, I don't have solutions, technical solutions for the world now, but it seems that apart from technical solutions that we are looking for a change of mentality, of the consumption mentality, and maybe artists can give hopes or optimism for people to start with, and that of course it sounds very threatening that we consume too much and our earth is really dying, and well, we need to take that in balance just by changing, of course, our mentality, but still have fun in life. And and I think artists are able maybe to do that, or to what you say, inspire this change of mentality.
I like the fact that you bring time into this. You know, over the evolution of your animals. You know, you put it into some kind of perspective of time, and I think that we with our technological world, that time is so compressed. You know, to have the sense of how things evolved for so long. You know, this other sense of time, I think, is really something that comes into the whole idea of sustainability. Is something that we don't think about enough. You know, in terms of things take a long time to. I think you could solve the problems given enough time, that the animals could, you know, in that evolutionary process, you know, in time could do it. But probably we'll all be gone by then. But
yeah, I see somebody. Okay. So another question: is it related to time, or is it another?
Well, more sort of. Because I wonder, like, do designers, or do you think it's important to like design stuff what is also more sellable, or like the ideas are, the goal to go, or to like, in this system it's more like the consumers, we need to consume like the design and food and stuff to sustain the whole system. But isn't it that there's a difference in a system that can make it more valuable to have the world sustained? Or I don't know exactly if I'm clear enough.
Well, I think you
Theo
mean that.
understands, yeah.
How does it all fit in capitalism, or how?
Is sustainability good for capitalism?
probably not.
Sustainability could forget capitalism, so it would be stronger than capitalism. because capitalism is strong, right? Or
I-
maybe because of, well, I'm thinking often of this new crisis that people, it's a protest of the consumers, because I think we have already everything now, and we don't want to buy anymore. And that might be one of I'm not an economist, but I think that might be one of the reasons that we are in a crisis now, because we have a house, we have everything, right? So we are really spoiled, and people tend to put more quality into their life instead of gaining the money. They prefer more days free in a week than work and gather money all the time.
The thing that you said triggered me a little bit in thinking about this notion of you put a critical statement with the product in the world, but what is then the next step afterwards? What would be the follow-up, for instance, with a project like the blood lamp? How do you see that? You placed it out there, and what is the reaction then?
Well, that's a tricky question. I mean, I think it depends on the project. I mean, Blood Lamp in particular it's not created with a commercial output in mind, and I also think that, as I explained in the presentation, I mean, my whole process of attempting to get hold of blood and to try and understand how it could be a viable solution, it clearly isn't, from what I understand. So with a project like that, I think that for me personally, the statement is enough, because it was about trying to challenge a way of thinking. But on occasion, I think with other projects, maybe another way to approach it is to take a slightly more commercial way of approaching it. But I think that depends on the aim of the project. It's project by project thing. I don't think I really have an answer for that.
No.
Sorry.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Was there iemand? Yeah, and Fiona, you would?
I guess it's in response. It's this idea that everything must be useful and functional, and then we wouldn't have these beautiful creatures.
Yeah.
So it's this. How much function and use do we have, and where are the boundaries for that? If everything, how far do we take? How far do we take it? And it's something that I'm particularly interested in, because we are in a situation where we're going to have to make choices between things. Who gets this, who gets that? If the resources are running out, do we decide we all survive? Actually, one of the most amazing lectures I ever went to was from a designer who was working in NASA, and he was working on the spacecrafts and what you can take up into space. It's extreme environment. And I think that he was constantly fighting with the engineers about the amount of radiation that went into the space capsule and the things that you could do in extreme environment. And in reality, if you could just send people up into space, the most safest way is just to completely have a steel tube with no windows in, and you'd be protected. But everyone who goes up in space says that when they look back at the Earth and they see the Earth, they're just mesmerised by the whole beautiful thing that they see. And so, they managed to get, we can have a window. And he said that one of the things, again, you're up in this extreme condition, and then, you've got one window and one person can look out and see the Earth. But he was saying, but the most important thing is, if you can make that window just a tiny bit, so two of you can look out at the same time and be able to exchange how wonderful they see, is that the amount, how big does that hole have to be to make, the functionality, where does the functionality stop, where we stop the humanity and where, we just become part of this sort of stripped down machine. So, and I find that very fascinating. Well, that's obviously the extreme condition, but when you're thinking of what's manufactured, what's not manufactured, what things do we allow, where does the pleasure and quality of our lives, slip over to survival and, you know, all of those things. I think it's quite a sort of, it's a potent mixture of things that we have to think about with all these different crises and things going on. And I think this is absolutely right, that I think there is a generation who doesn't want to own things anymore. They want to have experiences. They want to experience things more. And maybe sitting down, having a lovely dinner and making food and having that pleasure of doing that is far more important than, you know, owning many things or doing many things. So, you know, I think we're all kind of in this crisis of, you know, what's going on. But I think also humanity is always there, and it's not always about kind of consuming. It's a different kind. How do we consume in more kind of qualitative ways?
Yeah. So that's one question. Roos, yeah. The other thing, which I'm sure somebody must be interested in knowing, what is it then specifically what a designer can contribute in science? So that's one of my sort of urges, which I would like to have answered. But let's first, Roos.
Well, I think I have another question. If I understand correctly, you as designers are more concerned with making people think about this question of energy than with the objects themselves. But where does the museum stand in this? What's your opinion about what should the museum do? Because I think the museum is much concerned with objects and getting a collection. And in 15 years' time, how should we reflect on this show in this museum? What do you think about this?
Yeah. Do you want to answer it?
And do you want to answer that? You're a museum.
Yeah.
Not a museum, you're a museum.
Yeah, this is a bit the double role that you get if you are a presenter and a moderator. But for me, as a museum, I see that in the design world, these new ways of thinking are popping up. And I think as a museum, it's good to not only look in retrospective and to make sure that you have a good, sustainable, art historical collection, but that you also are aware of the things that go on in future. And I hope that if you say 10 or 20 years, if we look back to this show, that it was just the first one, the beginning of a new sort of exhibitions that you can make in design and art. I don't think this takes over, it changes, it's something which is added to the scope. I wish that a museum could have a more prominent role in any debate on actual issues, whether it's energy, whether it's obesitas, whether it is the bank crisis, whether it is that we actually welcomed the 7 billion person in the world. Any of these things which are fundamental in how our life will evolve, I hope that that's going to be also part of the collection of a museum. Do you want to add something to this?
Just that from an institutional point of view, not maybe a museum, but for me, my product is kind of, you know, I'm working in education, you know, and in the end, it's about the changing of attitudes within an educational process and to broaden that, you know, to broaden that role of how to think through. You know, it's about I think that design can participate hugely in imagining different scenarios in an academic framework as a way of sort of understanding the world in a very, very different way. Whereas up until now in an educational situation, the people who are thinking about our futures through technology and things are coming from the social scientists, from the sort of the technologists and the scientists, and they write lots of papers and they're doing things. But, you know, designers can contribute, I think, by equally doing very creative, cultural activity, generating knowledge through experimental design, trying to understand how culture actually works in the same way that the sciences and the social sciences do, but not by writing papers, but by producing physical manifestations that also think about things in the same way. So, you know, and then it ends up in a museum and everyone goes, oh, it's in a museum, it doesn't do anything. But where do you put it? You could put it in a, you know, forget that in the end the museum just is a kind of a distribution mechanism to enable it to get out there and for people to then, instead of reading it in a journal, they might, well, the nice thing about design is it can attract you and you think, well, that's a nice image, what's that? And you kind of start to be seduced into, I mean, the best design seduces you into thinking, you know, if our designers in schools are making propaganda, kind of, well, not propaganda, sorry, you know, advertising, they could actually do the same kind of thing to draw attention to all sorts of different issues. So I think we're missing a trick here in terms of generating knowledge and thinking about that in that framework. So I'm sort of, I'd answer that question about the museum coming from an academic perspective.
And can I ask one last question, devil's advocate, before we leave? I think then it's time to move. Why can science not do that? Why is then design of art needed in that process?
I think, do you like?
Go ahead.
I hogged it too much. So
Theo,
please.
Well, sorry.
do you want to answer?
No. Go ahead. Well, maybe science is not always able to do that. I mean, of course, we want to have use only wind for energy. But we can't, because there's not enough wind to feed all our energy need. Because if we want electric cars, okay, they can drive on electricity, and electricity we can generate with wind, but we need to put on every corner of the street a wind turbine to let all these cars run. So science cannot solve all the problems. And I think we should, of course, we should try to drive in electric cars, but maybe not that many. Right. And only if it's really necessary. We can walk, we can sit on a bicycle and move our legs. It's better for us. So, and if you discover the joy of sitting on a bicycle, then if you can,
you don't need a car anymore.
Sorry?
Then you don't need the car anymore.
No, but you enjoy, you discover something else, because I hate to sit in my car. Of course, I use my car, but I use it because, well, these bloody things have to be here. I can't take them by the train on my bicycle. Well, and think more of those solutions. And I'm thinking, because I'm going many times to the beach, and I use my car. I can't go with my car on the beach, so next year I want to put something behind my bicycle so I can do all the light things in there. And once coming to the beach, you can pull that small thing. I don't have to buy a four-wheel drive to go over that beach. It's not that heavy. So, and while doing it, my condition will become a lot better than it is now. And so it's good for you, and it's fun as well to walk in the rain and enjoy your life. That's what science can't give, but maybe artists can give that.
Endow, yeah. Beautiful to end. Thank you very much. Yeah.